Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, Rotarians and all colleagues in peace. I'm Jim Halderman, Chair of the District 5450 Peace Committee, and we sponsor this forum for discussion. We are indeed fortunate this evening to have a very special individual with us this evening. A few of us had the tremendous joy to hear him speak in Calgary this summer. Since then, it has been my dream to bring him to his powerful voice on peace to the forum. He's an ambassador to the UN, a parliamentarian, a major author, and most of all, an educator. He spent now over 50 years in a public career promoting peace and human security issues. Please help me welcome our presenter for this program, the Honorable Douglas Roche.
Thank you, Jim. And I must say at the outset, I like the word Rotary on your shirt. This gives me the opportunity of extending my compliments to the Rotary Peace Committee. I've been familiar with Rotary's work for many, many years. I've seen the results of that work all around the world. And so I pay very high respects to Rotary, and I thank you for this invitation. I speak to you tonight as a Canadian, which almost by definition means a friend of the United States. I believe that Canada must work with the US in building peace, not waging war. So I begin by recognizing that I have an immense problem with the US administration and Israel's military attack on Iran. The whole world is reeling from the effects of this illegal war, and which is now spinning out of control. I also condemn Russia's criminal acts in waging war against Ukraine. The wanton killing of the people of Gaza is another example of the flouting of international law, which has become a distinguishing characteristic of our times. All this represents the normalization of war as an instrument of foreign policy, and I wish to speak against that. I do wish to speak for a worldwide recommitment to adherence to the Charter of the United Nations as the indispensable instrument to obtain sustainable peace with social justice. The long journey of humanity from the old culture of war to a new culture of peace, the central issue of our times, is now passing through a dark valley. The international system that we have known for the past 80 years has been ruptured. With international law shredded and authoritarianism spreading, we are tossed about on raging seas. We need something solid to hold on to. We must cling to the United Nations Charter in these troubled times. The Charter not only provides an antidote to today's chaos, it is the basis for our hope for peace with social justice. The assault on the core values of a culture of peace, nonviolence, humanitarian law, respect and reconciliation, has been particularly egregious the past few years. It seems that might makes right has replaced the core values of the UN Charter. The suffering of fellow human beings in the Ukraine and Gaza wars, and now the spreading of war in the Middle East, particularly testifies to the disregard for international law by the major powers. The undermining of the UN Charter by the fractious permanent members of the UN Security Council is a scandal of world proportions. Public opinion, notably in the West, has allowed this undermining to continue. We must look deeper than President Trump himself to help to keep hope alive for peace with social justice. To keep our balance, we must take a long view and not be overwhelmed by the tragedies and confusion of the moment. Vision is required to maintain hope in the era of Trump. The historian Paul Kennedy has written about the decline of great nations of the past, which overspent on their militaries to the detriment of social needs. The real cost of America's outlandish spending on arms, long preceding Trump, is coming into view. The global South is starting to rebel against misplaced U.S. priorities. More nations are now calling for a strengthened multipolar world to offset a US-dominated unipolar world. The emergence of new players on the international scene makes 2026 a very different landscape than in 1989, when the fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of the Cold War magnified the importance of America. The 1990s presented a golden moment to solidify a peace dividend after the Cold War, but it never happened. NATO began its fateful expansion. The military-industrial complex, which President Eisenhower had first warned about, increased its dominance of American politics. Global military spending has increased every year for the past decade and now exceeds $2.7 trillion a year. And a large percentage of that spent by the United States. Consider the contradiction the political order is foisting on us. The total amount of money the countries spend annually on arms is now 750 times what they spend on the UN. The NATO countries are planning to spend 5% of their GDP on defense, while the UN is now cutting its budget and laying off staff. The arms trade thrives and people starve. The world is now swirling around us. International humanitarian law is ignored as authoritarianism spreads. I am totally with UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres' cry when he said, "We have entered into an age of reckless disruption and relentless human suffering." And he added, "Leaders must decide now what kind of world we choose to build together." I dissent from the wild disproportion of what the world spends on arms and what it spends on development. I dissent from the anti-humanitarian policies of war for peace. I dissent from the perpetuation of poverty through the greed of the rich. I dissent from the despoilation of the planet by short-sighted industrialism. Most of all, I dissent from the fabric of lies spun by the proponents of nuclear weapons, who would have us believe that these heinous instruments of mass murder make us safer. Soon, there will be no more living Hibakusha. Who will carry forward their message that what happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki must never happen again? We must keep alive the conscience of the world, protesting against such evil. Already the global conscience against nuclear weapons is weakening as arms control treaties break down and new nuclear arms races start up. threats to use nuclear weapons are chilling reminders of how dangerous the world has become. We now envision future wars run by artificial intelligence and even pretend that a Golden Dome missile defense will save us. We must stop making the same old mistakes as the world hurtles into a new era. The wooden-headedness of governments, as the historian Barbara Tuchman called it, must stop. Governments must cease pretending that military might and bombing innocent civilians will bring us security. Where shall we turn to get our bearings? With John F. Kennedy, I believe we can find peace not through a revolution in human nature, but the gradual evolution of the institutions we have already built. The Charter of the United Nations is an anchor for us. So too are the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, along with the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. These are more than documents. They are milestones in the human journey, and we need to protect them no matter the vicious political storms attacking them. They teach us that every human being has the sacred right to peace. In fact, on December the 19th, 2016, the UN General Assembly adopted the Declaration on the Right to Peace by a vote of 131 states in favor, 14 opposed, and 19 abstentions. The Western states led the opposition. The opponents fear that formalization of the right to peace will pave the way for a future comprehensive law against warfare. Well, that's exactly the point. As humanity continues to mature with each new generation, we must aim for a world without war. As our understanding of the universality of human rights grows, we will come to understand that the existence of weapons of mass destruction is absolutely incompatible with every human being's right to live in peace. Though we cannot, at least not yet in the moving history of the world, implement the right to peace, we can practice a culture of peace. A culture of peace revolves around nonviolence, sustainable development, respect for all human rights, education, and the development of a strong public opinion. Our goal must be nothing less than the mobilization of strong public opinion to move governments to a common security agenda. Never doubt that this can be done. The UN Summit of the Future, held in September 2024, produced a lengthy document, the Pact for the Future, which charts a path to a brighter future for all of humanity. It includes a pledge to move faster toward achieving the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement commitments on climate change. The document calls for addressing the root causes of conflicts and accelerating commitments on human rights, including women's rights. The Pact for the Future brings into sharp focus the need for a recommitment to international cooperation based on respect for international law. Over the years, the UN has produced a body of law of unprecedented proportions. One only has to look at the growth of human rights, the condemnation of nuclear weapons, and the protection of the planet from global warming to grasp the scale of UN activity. However, the laws emanating from the UN are dependent on the willingness of the major states to accept them in order for them to be effected. When states do not agree with the findings of the International Court of Justice, the highest court in the world, um, they simply ignore them. Similarly, the International Criminal Court cannot carry out prosecutions in countries that do not recognize its jurisdiction. Although humanity has definitely lifted itself up in the past 100 years, it has not yet reached the level of enforceable world law. So we are left in the humbling intermediate condition in which the world in all its major aspects has become globalized, but in which there is relatively little enforceable global law. The Pact for the Future cannot by itself solve problems, let alone enforce solutions. But without at least a map to guide peoples forward toward a safer world, humanity would be even more lost than it is in today's conflicted atmosphere. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted by the UN in 1948, was at first only a document. But combinations of like-minded governments and an active civil society breathed life into it. So today, no one disputes that it has been a prime instrument in the elevation of how human beings treat one another. I turn to the next generation to keep alive the dream of a nuclear weapons-free world as the basis of common security. At first, the idea of the abolition of slavery was just a dream, but it happened. So did the dream of freedom from colonialism and the dream of ending apartheid. All these evils were ended because enough people rose up and demanded governments end them. So aim high. Set the year 2045, the 100th anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and also the 100th anniversary of the signing of the United Nations Charter, as the year that peoples of the world will be free of the specter of nuclear weapons. We can obtain a world that is human-centered and genuinely democratic, a world that builds and protects peace, equality, justice, and development. We can obtain a world in which human security, as envisioned in the principles of the UN Charter, replaces armaments, violent conflict, and wars. We can obtain a world in which everyone lives in a clean environment with a fair distribution of the Earth's resources and international law protects human rights. The politics of the past have brought us untold wars and suffering. Isn't it time to try something better? Isn't it time to bring our heads and hearts together to produce a true human security? Isn't it time to raise the standards of civilization for the sake of survival? Spare me the charge that this is mere idealism. The agenda for survival is no longer a dream, but a pragmatic demand of the human race. Thank you.
Well, we thank you. And Douglas would be open to any questions that we might have. And one question I have is China going to come out of this looking like the good person?
Did you say China?
Yes, I did.
Okay. China, yes. Uh, well, China is stepping up its support of the United Nations as the United States holds back its funding and puts the UN in financial crisis. China is increasing its funding and its involvement in the United Nations, and one can state well, China is doing this for its own interests. Well, I say, well, yes, yes, it is, but it's also recognizing the value of the United Nations as an instrument that recognizes the need for mutual security in the world. I do not accept for one moment that that China is our enemy, so to speak. China may be an opponent, and certainly wants to increase its economic strength across the world, particularly through its Belt and Road Initiative, in which it has made links with many countries and areas around the world, notably in Africa. But I think that China is modernizing. It's becoming if it's already exceeds the United States in some economic categories, but generally speaking, the growth of the Chinese economy is going to launch it into a first place position in the world. And it is not China that has military bases around the world. And so I think that what needs to be done is to recover that spirit of cooperation that the United States and China had at the end of the Cold War, and what I call the golden moment in the 1990s, and try to build forward in recognizing each has its own sphere of influence, and they want and need to use that for the common good of world survival and development.
Yeah, thank you. Richard Denton has a question.
Thank you very much, Jim, and thank you, Doug, for an excellent presentation. Uh, Mark Carney at Davos talked about international law being dead, and but he also talked about the importance of middle powers, and certainly you're a proponent of the middle powers years ago, and as was Trudeau, getting the middle powers to exert a great deal of influence against the hegemon, the bullies. Um, Mark Carney, though, did not say anything about changing the system as such in terms of the economics of going to a sustainable economy, a circular economy. And I'm just wondering, again, what are your feelings for the future in that regard? Can the middle powers actually change the system?
Yes, for the benefit of the whole audience, let me say that Mark Carney is the Prime Minister of Canada, who was elected last April. He's still in his first year and has already achieved quite a standing in the world for particularly in his speech at Davos in January, in which he called for a new alignment of countries in the world, particularly the middle powers, those states that are not major powers, like the permanent members of the Security Council, and are not the minor states. So there's a range of about 30 to 40 countries that have an important standing, and Canada, his country, and my country, is foremost in that range of middle power countries. And so he has espoused a strengthened cooperation in trade and in security matters that would make us less dependent on the United States. In the case of Canada, we have been overly dependent. Three-quarters of Canada's trade is with the United States, and it's not a healthy condition, particularly when the President of the United States takes an erratic stand on on relations and the imposing of tariffs and so on. So as we develop the international system out of the chaos that prevails today, um, Carney has espoused, and I have long held myself, that a range of middle powers has a real opportunity to set a standard, to be not to be more than a conscience, certainly to be that, but to set a moral and practical standard for cooperation for the common good. This requires the leadership of the world today requires more than the United States, China, and Russia as the major powers. It requires a coming together of a wide range of peoples, and the middle powers, new forms of alignments the moment for middle powers has come.
Catherine?
Thank you, Jim, and thanks, Doug. Again, just, a very direct, visionary speaker, and I really, really appreciate all that you had to say, and not mincing words. I think that's really important right now. I'm a Rotary Peace Fellow, and I'm also part of the Mutually Assured Survival Group. And, we're part of the Rotary family, really focused on the importance that to be pro-peace, it's also important to be anti-war because they're part of the same coin. And, you spoke about the UN. And, not a lot of people know or realize that the UN and all of the different aspects of it were created by people power, by people at the grassroots getting together, advocating, engaging, being involved in politics with a little p, not a party one way or the other, to ensure that, that we had the United Nations. And as you mentioned, unfortunately, my country, which I'm very ashamed of right now, in Israel, we're the two biggest aggressors in the world right now. I work around the world. I work a lot with Gaza youth and people in Palestine. I'm so glad you brought that up because the genocide is continuing, as well as the war in Ukraine. And now we have a whole new war, which is lighting the whole Middle East and, could spread very easily to a world war. And so I guess my question is, in the middle of all that, we're trying to organize, we're trying to go to the streets, we're trying to boycott, to be strategic with people power and numbers against these larger, very few powers over and military industrial conflicts, making so much money off of the wars. But the UN, again, international law has really been decimated lately because it is about precedent and people following it and having faith in it. And it sounds like you still have a lot of faith in it, which I'm glad to hear because I know you are an expert on it. And so just maybe a little bit more from your perspective on how we can build it up again, how we can ensure that, people are following it, that it is useful, that it is making a difference, maybe some reforms that would be necessary, whatever we can do to hold on to it so that we don't become a completely lawless world, which is another, possibility right now.
Well, thank you very much indeed. That such a perceptive comment and your deep understanding of the situation in the UN today. Uh, First, on civil society, the role of NGOs has probably never been more important today because we can't rely on the politicians or the bureaucrats to diplomats to see us through this crisis. It is the conscience and the power of people, ourselves. I say ourselves, that needs to be manifested today, to be felt in the political system. How we do that is open to different interpretations of where we live and how we act and so on. So I just think that the expression of our will, even through letters, through speeches, through contacts, through belonging to organizations, to uniting, to obtain changes in specific laws, even at the local level, and working upward from there. All that is extremely important today, that we remain involved and we do not become discouraged or disheartened by the outbreak of war and what we're living through today. I have to keep reminding myself of that all the time, and that the reasons for hope for a future are based on what we have been able to do in the past in building the UN and the systems and the multiple agencies and all the tremendous number of people who work in one way or another in the extended UN system. It's phenomenal what has been able to be done. So we have to keep our heart up. That's the first point. On the question of the UN itself, of course, it needs reforms. Start with the veto system, but we can't get rid of the veto system because the major powers would not have come into the UN in the first place had they not received a veto. So we say, what do we do with the veto? Well, they now have a rule that when a state exercise a veto, it must come before the General Assembly to explain its veto. Well, that's something. It's a long way from the resolution of the veto problem, but it's at least a start. Another reform would be to have vetoes subjected to a vote in the General Assembly, and if 3/4 of the General Assembly votes against the veto, the veto itself would be overturned. That's going to be very difficult to do, but not impossible at all. And the expansion of the Security Council is long overdue. I mean, the Security Council represents the world of 1945, the victories of World War II. But now the Security Council, permanent members now composed of the United States, Russia, Britain, France, and China, needs to be expanded to take in Japan, India, Brazil, and Germany. Those four countries: Japan, India, Brazil, and Germany, as permanent members. Africa needs to be represented. They say, well, who's going to represent Africa? Well, South Africa or Nigeria. Well, why can't both Nigeria and South Africa be members of the Security Council? So it's a work that's long been worked on. I mean, I think we must go back 20 or 25 years of this business about reforming the UN. Kofi Annan, around the year 2000, when he was the Secretary General, led the process quite well, and as I reflect on it now, came close to getting some agreement to make that expansion of the Security Council, but it fell apart. And the UN has declined in public support. A lot of attention is paid the United States being arrears in its dues, and it is true that the United States has held up. But if you look at all the statistics, you will see that many other countries are also in arrears and don't pay sufficiently. And it was a mistake to have the United States pay 25% of all the bills when they began. They later reduced that to 22%. And when they were having that debate about the share of a country, the share of the budget that be taken up by a country, and reducing the United States share, the first country that objected to a reduction of the share of the United States was the United States. They said, "Well, why are you objecting? You're going to pay less." No, we want to keep it up so we can keep our influence up. But influence is one thing and dominance is another. And I think that all of us who saw the performance of the president of the United States when he went before the UN at the general debate last September would be pretty shocked by the denigration of the UN that took place on that occasion. And so we have to I don't know about rebuilding, but we have to reconstitute or reaffirm the charter and the processes of the UN. And those of us here tonight, I'm sure we are all aware of the immense amount of of good that is done in health and education and women's rights and so many fields of human need that are addressed by the UN, the refugees, the migrants, the basis of respect for human respect that the UN represents in its efforts to alleviate distress and poverty. All of that needs to be better appreciated in the general public. If you go around the world, the UN is better appreciated in many other parts of the world. In Africa, in Asia, in Latin America, there's a wide appreciation of the UN. It's only in the Western world, in Europe, and particularly in North America, in the United States, where the media has somehow turned, if not against the UN, they're writing it off. That it hasn't stopped wars and so on. Well, of course, the reason the UN hasn't been able to stop wars is because of the veto of the major powers in the Security Council themselves. So it's grossly unfair to put the blame for the ills of the world on the UN. Now, when I champion the UN, as I do here now, and will continue to do, I'm also cognizant of its own failures. It has a bureaucracy. It has systems that probably need overhaul. But don't forget, the UN is the only place in the world where the whole world comes together, all 191 countries coming together. It's operating in six official languages, a multitude of cultures, and so it's marvelous that it has been able even to survive and to operate as long as it has. But if we allow this idea of the present president of the United States to have a board of peace as a rival to the UN. I mean, this is a preposterous idea of doing an end run around an organization that the president of the United States at the time, Franklin Roosevelt, 32nd president of the United States, himself was the founding originator of the UN was Roosevelt, working with Churchill and Stalin at the time. And so we must not accept this idea that America is turning away from the UN. We have to recover, and it's up to the American people to determine who's going to lead them, but we have to recover a United States appreciation of how the UN helps all countries, including the United States, to operate more efficiently and effectively in a changing world. So thank you for that question on the UN. I think that I've tried to convey my feeling, which is feeling about the necessity of the UN. I do not. I'm not putting the UN on a pedestal, on an ideal platform, and saying it's perfect. A whole lot of things are wrong with it, but the idea of a place where the world comes together and to recognize that the major problems in the world are global, are transnational, exceed the boundaries of countries, and must be worked on in a common manner. That when we understand the fullness of human rights, the unity of human rights, that everybody, no matter where they live, their color, their race, their background, have the same rights, then we understand better that we need an institution to protect those rights.
Fantastic. I have trouble catching my breath there. Thank you. Jeff Haas in France has a question. Jeff is now a Rotarian in the US after many years creating peace in China. Jeff.
Thanks very much, Jim, and thanks, Doug, for your comments throughout joining us tonight. I'm curious whether there are two or three things, perhaps major shifts that you've noticed occurring perhaps over the last 20 or 30 years that have brought us to what feels to me like an extreme position, ways of thinking, ways of expressing, ways of taking action not just in the United States under Trump, but in Europe. I'm thinking of Hungary. I'm thinking of Russia. I'm thinking of to some extent Germany and Poland. What's behind this shift to what I consider an imbalance, right? And if you would agree with any of what I just said, do you see any indications of a rebalancing starting to take place in the way, maybe back toward countries and individuals working together to get things done as opposed to uh, acting pugnaciously toward each other? Thank you.
Yeah, well, two things. The Pact for the Future was adopted by all the states, and it set out a course for working more effectively on the Sustainable Development Goals and extending the implementation of the Paris Agreement on the climate, and also working more effectively on the abolition of nuclear weapons. Those are some of the big issues that they are working on. But the I would say the undermining of the UN came as the far right accelerated in a number of countries over the past 20 years. And we've seen that the escalation of well, you call it it's more than conservative. I mean it's mangled conservative principles into a far right ideology of that accents the individual freedom instead of a collective an understanding of the collective good of society to hold us all together. So this is a result of what they call the revolt against the elites, those in charge of the world, of the government systems after the Cold War, after World War II, and then gradually after the Cold War. Did they allow this gulf between the rich and the poor to widen into hostility? And I mean, such things. I mean, in the practical level, that came out of that was Brexit, when Britain left the European Union, and so on. So and we've seen the development of the MAGA movement in the United States. So it's difficult to put all of this into like one basket, so to speak. There's a lot of things that have happened to hold to divide people and to make resentments into causes to I mean, perhaps a lot of the establishment should have been taken down, but I'm not for the kind of revolution that denies people the benefits of the institutions of law and academic and media and science that have been developed. So we need to understand that the United Nations is the place. I'm not saying that there are not other institutions in the world, but right now we're talking about the UN as a centerpiece of the world. That the United Nations is a place where we can try to find a way to overcome those divides, and so that the unity of humanity that is our common ground can be better espoused.
Boy, it's almost like you have created what you did when we were about to enter the year 2000, Safe Passage to the 21st Century with Robert. And then listening to you tonight is like a replay of what you said in that book and what you said in your latest book about don't give up hope. Hope is the answer. And I listened to you tonight, and I really want to just say thank you for remembering that we are part of the solution. And I think that's what you did tonight. You showed us that we, as women, as men, Rotary, have to admit what's not working and work toward making that possible. When I interviewed Ben Ferenz for the Peace podcast, he said it takes courage not to be discouraged. And I think you've done that tonight, Douglas, and I want to thank you for that. I've known you for over 20 years,
Oh.
and I think you have always been that model of what we can do and calling it like it is. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Barbara. If you listen to the news tonight, there's plenty of reason to be discouraged and to be disheartened and to get blown away. It's madness that's out there. And it's not going to help things if we ourselves who have, and let's be frank, we have some understanding. The people here who are gathered together in this meeting we're now having, we have some understanding and some commitment to a world that is fairer and safer for everybody. That's what we're all about. And so it doesn't help if we lose our heart ourselves and if we lose our own perspective. Sure, we're suffering. I am suffering. I'm not at all, like complacent or. I mean, and the darn thing out there could get worse before it gets better. But we and multiplying in finding ways to extend our own influence wherever we are, whatever walk of life we're in, to extend that influence into so that we get a political public policies that are more attuned to the need for the common good. We've got to find a way to build to rebuild the hope that was present coming out of World War II. If the leaders of the World War II could during the worst of the war, the bombings and everything that went on at that time, and I was alive at that time. I was 16 when World War II ended. So although I did not have, fortunately, I thank God, I didn't have to go and fight. I was sufficiently mature at age 16 to have an understanding of what was going on. And so I well remember the horrors of the war when the millions of people were being killed with bombs and so on. So it's a terrible, terrible period of humanity. Now, what I'm saying is, if at that time the leaders could find a way out to build the United Nations and and all the ancillary things that came from it, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and so on, if they could do that then. Well, then we now, in today's chaos and today's maelstroms, we also can do it. So I don't want to hear from people about this. I'm not talking about the people here tonight. I'm talking about some of my friends.
Right, we know.
I don't want to hear that. Oh, it's all so bad. I can't do anything. Oh, I've got to go to the movies or something. Well, I'm all for going to the movies, once in a while to get our mind taken away from this thing. Well, what I'm saying is that we cannot lose heart just because it's tough out there. It's tough, and I said before, and I'll say again, but I don't want to extend this too much. That the people of the United States have to decide who's going to lead them, and let's hope that we can get a leadership that will return the American people and the people of the world, not just the Americans, the people of the world, to a respect for law. And if we do not have a law that will international law to protect all human beings, so that our safety from weaponry, from arms, our safety, our security from poverty, economic and social development, our safety from the planet being destroyed by climate change, all these immense problems that need to be addressed. If we have to keep our eye on that while we're enduring a present that we cannot accept, and we have to find our way out of.
Yeah. You
I
gave
have
us a vision. Thank you.
Barbara, I have a quick question. And, sometimes we forget that 95% of the world is at peace. We are focusing on 5%. But you began talking about, you've talked a little bit about, but could you develop more about the emerging new players, you called it?
The emerging
New players.
The emerging new players. I
Yeah,
mean,
in the world.
well, there are new groupings in the trade field and in the political field. The rise of the BRICS, the countries of Africa, the Latin American countries. There's new kinds of associations, the Commonwealth, the Francophonie. These are groupings that are sometimes regionally based and sometimes trade based. There's much that's going on that's around the UN system. I see the UN as a centerpiece of how to make a greater systems of cooperation in the world, rather than trying to go at everything alone.
Well, we have a question from Robert.
Douglas, our longtime pride as Rotarians in the United Nations is so heartily affirmed, and your advocacy is so deeply appreciated. And then the discussion since then has so elaborated on the United Nations and towards the future. May we just go back for a moment to that golden moment that you mentioned? Were you involved with the United Nations in a special way? And are there lessons to be put forward towards 2045 out of that key experience of time? I'm sure you wrote about that in your book, but if you would just comment while we have the opportunity.
Yes, thank you very much indeed. I, I've been at and around the United Nations now for more than 50 years. I went as a young parliamentarian in 1972, 1973. That's now more than 50 years that I've been at the United Nations as a parliamentarian, as an ambassador, as an advisor, as a civil society representative. So I've experienced the UN in many dimensions, and the UN it affected my life when I went there. I have. I'm just looking here now. I probably can't see it, but this book I'm holding in my hand is the Charter of the United Nations in the 6 official languages, and it was given to me by the Secretary General Javier Perez de Cuellar.
Oh,
March 1985, when I had completed when I was then chairman of the first committee, the Committee on Disarmament. I was elected chairman, and Mr. The Secretary General Perez was kind enough to write to Ambassador Douglas Roche in appreciation of his commitment to the cause of the United Nations. Well, I've held when I taught a lot at the University of Alberta, and I would hold this book up to the students and read to them the preamble of the charter. We the peoples of the United Nations save succeeding generations, and so on. And so those words in the charter have been embodied in me, and have had opportunities to reflect for many years. I think that we should start to lay the groundwork for the celebration of the 100th anniversary of the United States. If we can make it for the next 20 years out of the chaos of today, it will be a tremendous achievement. It needs to be rooted even more deeply in the systems of the world. That I have a hope that it will be. It's got to survive the attacks on it and the undermining of it that's going on now. And the selection of the next Secretary General will certainly be a key factor. As you know, there's a huge movement on to have a woman selected as Secretary General, and I personally I hope that happens. But we'll see. I think it would be if a woman were to be selected as Secretary General of the UN, I think it would be a tremendous empowering. I would have a tremendous empowering effect on women and girls around the world. We would see tremendous repercussions of what I would call the humanizing of policies that would follow from that. And but the selection of the Secretary General is controlled by the permanent members of the Security Council, all of whom 5 members have a veto on who's even presented to the General Assembly for election. So I think we need to turn our attention to the future leadership and the possibilities of the UN ahead.
Mhm. When Robert was alive, he wrote the book First Lady of the United Nations, and he had this vision that we would have a woman leader. And recently, Ambassador Chaudhry has said that we need a woman in the role of Secretary General. I think the time has come, but I just want to again thank you, Douglas, because you're such a historian and such an aware futurist. And I think that we have to build on the groundwork that they brought the United Nations together. I was 3 years old when World War II ended, and my dad went and got the 41 Ford out of the garage, and we honked the horn. And I said, "Why are you honking the horn?" He said, "Because the war is over." And that's my dream, that our wars are over. And he said, "And now we can celebrate peace." And this is what we have to work on. Am I correct, Douglas?
Yes, indeed. I wish I'd been there with your father to honk the horn. I mean, it's just was maybe that's maybe we all gotta honk the horns a bit louder.
Honk the horn for peace. I know it's left such an impression on me. And I said, "Dad, why are you doing this?" He said, "Because we can have peace now." And here we are all these years later.
Well, we can I, I, may I say this because I know that I'm speaking largely here to an American audience, and so I feel I have to be careful and respectful as I wish to be. And I can only say that it's up to you. I mean, you in a very wide sense in the United States to determine the leadership you're going to have. And I retain a hope that the process will right itself sufficiently. The political process will right itself sufficiently to produce a leader that can restore, uh, well, what Ronald Reagan used to call, the city on the hill. I mean, you were a beacon. I mean, I find it painful because I lived in the United States for 8 years of my life. 3 of my children were born in the U.S. and they were very happy years. I was very happy when I lived in the United States. That was a long time ago. And so I traveled. I've probably been in more states than most Americans have been. And so I know the states, and I know the American people, and there's a greatness in the American people that is not coming through today. It's been submerged by the present political leadership. And so it's not up to me as a Canadian to tell the American people what how to do, and yet I have a stake in it, and so does everybody in the world. What you do affects the whole world. I'm affected by what's going on, and so we have to just keep our eye. I said this again. I don't want to repeat myself too many times tonight. That we have to look for the future and build for it.
Douglas, we are so appreciative and so thankful. We are indeed grateful for your knowledge, your time, and your experience. This has been hugely valuable. I will send out the piece that you sent because it is so timely. And as I believe it was Catherine, somebody mentioned, you're calling the shots the way they are. We thank you very much. I want to touch next month. We're pleased to bring Alisa Switch. She's 30 years of experience in peace building, policy advocacy, and practice. In addition, she's an educator at George Mason University at Carter Center for Peace and Conflict Resolution. Again, your Honorable Douglas Roche, the Honorable is the most important. We are thankful. There is a reason you have the initials OC behind you, the Order of Canada. Canada also has given him the highest honors possible. Douglas, we are grateful and we thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, and thanks
you.
to all of you for your attention and your questions. And I found this very very helpful and hopeful just being with you. Thank you.